the energy in the room becomes crystal clear. And as the person gets closer to taking their last breath, sometimes the energy increases. Sat and held her hand, and it was such a strong vibration and energy in the room. It took me to a place, perhaps what was happening to her. She looked over my left shoulder. I can't see anything. There was somebody there, and I felt her presence. And then she closed her eyes again, and that was it.
Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa. Hello, and welcome everybody back to another episode of the Let's Talk Near Death podcast, where we are in season 13 talking about death experiences. So the moments of death, the moments right before, the moments after, for the people that are dying, for the people that are with loved ones who are dying, and also with medical staff and researchers who are familiar with these moments. Today, we're going to be hearing some very interesting first-hand accounts from Paul Smith. Now, Paul Smith is a hospice worker. He's been doing this type of work for about 18 years, helping people right in these final moments of life. He's sat with many people as they do pass, as they transition into the next part of whatever this journey holds for us. Paul is also a long-time meditation practitioner, and he uses his meditation to help him to be able to connect spiritually and to be able to understand some of the journey that people are going through. He's got many stories of experiences he's had, and I'm so grateful to have Paul here. So Paul Smith, welcome to the Let's Talk Near Death podcast show. I'm excited to have you here.
It was wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for making it happen.
You're welcome. Can you tell us, how did you get into working with people who were dying, who were right at the end of life? Where did this journey start?
I'll have to go back quite a way to answer
okay.
that question. When I mean, how did it even cross my mind? Because hospice is not a thing that's really commonly known or commonly talked about, but it was years ago. It was in England before I even came to the country I now live in, which is America, California, America. And I was a young man in my 20s, and bumped into an old friend, and like you do, so, well, how's life? You catch up a bit, and her name was Miranda, and one amongst some of the things she said was, "Oh, I'm doing hospice as well." And that was really unusual back then. It hadn't actually even got off the ground very long, probably 10 years or so in England by then. I said, "Oh, what's that?" It sounded intriguing to me. It wasn't hospital, it was hospice. I said, "Well, I work with people who are dying, or I help people who are dying." And immediately I go, "Dying. Oh, how fascinating." No, it's probably a natural fit for me. I am someone who's always been curious about the edge of the known and the unknown. I began the practice of meditation in my teens, and it was a daily part of my life. So exploring that part of life, where do we come from, where are we going, what are we doing here, what happens when we die, was really a common part of my daily consciousness. So after that brief conversation, we moved on and said our goodbyes, but I was snagged. Something happened to me at that moment. The universe hit me with a love bomb or something, and it never left me. I just knew that was for me, even though it was many years later, and immigrated to another country, US, before it actually came to pass. And the way it came to pass was really one of those serendipitous occasions. Like I said, even after the years passed, I hadn't forgotten about it. I knew one day I was going to do it. And here I was living in an apartment, just newly married to my lovely wife. She's from Japan. Keiko is her name. And we were living in an apartment. And for some reason, I had to go down to the car, in the carpool, down a few stairs and across the concrete. And as I was walking across the concrete car area, there was a chap on his bicycle. looking extremely lost because he was lost. And he asked me about a certain building. I says, well, you're actually, you're in the wrong place. And he says, oh, and somehow we got chatting, and even more somehow, he was on his way to visit someone who was approaching end of life. And we got talking about that, and he said he belonged to Mission Hospice. And it was just a few-minute conversation. He said, "There's something you should do. I got a feeling you would like that." And it was like, here we go. Now's the time. I'm settled in my life over here, and I thought everything had come together. Now is the time to pursue it. Even so, it was a little bit after that, but I contacted Mission Hospice here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Went through the training, and here I am now, some sort of 18 years later, of amazing, life-changing experiences, one after the other. There's a new life-changing experience just around the corner, almost every week.
I can
So that's how I
imagine.
got into it. That's what inexplicable things that called me into it. But it's fascinating. The end of life is fascinating. What may be is fascinating. How we do it is fascinating. And of course, we don't talk about it.
Yeah.
So the fascination gets suppressed in a way because no one wants to talk about it until it's happening. And then everything changes. We get forced into talking about it, and it's like, oh, here we are. And then you know how profound life is and how that end of life moment may be, because it might be coming.
Exactly. Because we're all going to face it. Yes, we're all going to face it.
Isn't it the truth?
It comes as a surprise sometimes when it happens, doesn't it? When family members or friends or someone dies, we get a surprise about that. And yet we enter this life, and it doesn't take long for us to realize that this is going to happen. We could become quite accustomed to the concept.
We're really, really good at ignoring the obvious.
Yes.
And probably the two things that we're absolutely most afraid of in life are aging and death. And they're the two most inevitable, actually going to happen things in everybody's life. So we live our life in fear.
We really do.
Public speaking is the other one, so that's number 3. We're doing all 3 right now.
We're doing okay today.
Look out if I hyperventilate and pass out.
Oh, no, we're doing great. It's funny, isn't it, how those fears keep kicking in there. I want to get to the conversation. I know we're going to talk a little bit about the experiences that you've had, the moments that you've had, the deathbed experiences. But when we're talking about the fear, we're talking about how people don't talk about death. We push it under the rug and we pretend it's not going to happen. Why do you think that is?
Because we're afraid of the unknown. We're afraid of uncertainty. We like to fool ourselves that we have certainty. We like to feel that we got all the plans laid out for our future, the steps ahead until that time that's going to come to us, and it's always going to be 30 or 40 years down the road. So we think. So we put it off because we're simply afraid. And I can tell you about my own experience as being someone who is very familiar with life on the edge. As a daily meditator, I go to this place within where I know we're more than our physical body. And I've been involved in hospice care, end of life, for many, many years. And yet I had a cancer diagnosis myself just about 4 years ago. Totally surprised. Came out of the blue.
Yeah. Are you okay?
Yeah, I am. Yes, I'm still here, one day at a time. Yeah. But what I was fascinated by is how it affected me. The truth is, Kirsty, that we're attached. We're so attached to everything, all the little things, and you don't actually realize it until you are faced with them not being there. And we're afraid of being judged, and we're afraid of not matching up. We're afraid. All of those things. And we can be, I'm part of your community, the end of life community, and the near-death experiences. I've listened to hundreds of near-death experiences. There's no doubt in my mind we go on, not only from hearing other people's experiences and your own, Kirsty, but my own experiences and the experiences I have in the realm of in the end of life zone. There's no doubt. I'm convinced, shall we say, that we go on. Even so, it's a step into the unknown, and we just don't like that. It takes a processing to be ready for that, and we do seem to go through a natural process of getting ready for that moment. But to start with, we just ain't ready. We resist.
Exactly. It takes a bit of time to start to process what's going to happen, how we feel about it, what we believe will happen, all of the practical to do things, the daily stuff. So, yeah, there's a lot in there.
It makes sense. If you can remember back to being a newborn or soon over, just how much it took to get used to having a body and to getting used to eating and to just learning how to talk and tie your shoelaces. Everything took such effort that we took such ownership of it. We only really know our current state, our body, what we relate to as ourself, and letting go of that doesn't come naturally. And it doesn't come easily, not at first, because we identify with our body as who we are. However, as I like to say to many of the people I meet and who's approaching end of life, we are not our bodies. And this is where we learn to let go and detach a little and allow the process and to trust the process. And then magical things begin to happen.
Are you happy to talk about some of those magical things? I know you've been with a lot of people. You've done 18 years of hospice work, which, you know, my heart goes out to you for that. That's no small feat. That's amazing. And, you know, I want to say thank you for all the work that you've done, all the lives that you've helped and the impact that you've had. It's such an important piece of life. Death is life. And what has it been like for you personally with people in those final moments?
The final moments, it's a phase that we call actively dying. I do all of my hospice service in a hospice house that we have here in the Bay Area, and so people are coming and going all the time. I like to say we come in through the front door and we leave through the roof, and people know that when they come here, there's something very final about coming to a hospice house. So people have approached hospice care very often in a place of fear, some even in a place of denial still. But they come into our house. So I don't say that I connect with every friend who comes to stay with us, but very often I do. And I know in the first few moments, really, of meeting a person, whether we're going to have a connection. And when I do make that connection, I make a commitment with them to walk with them through the journey till they take their last breath. Of course, taking that last breath, we never quite know when it is. But I walk with them along the way and hold their hand. And these relationships are just so incredible. I mean, you thank me for doing this work, which I appreciate. I think it really is me who is thankful, because the insights that I have into people's lives and to what we go through as we approach end of life is priceless. And it's changed my life in so many ways, and continues to every single day up until a couple of hours ago, where I'd left someone who is actively dying at the moment. And I'll return a little bit later. But so the process, it might start with so we've been introduced. And I said, so how do you feel about approaching end of life, possibly? I always leave the door open, because anything can happen anytime, including recovery. Who knows? Unlikely, but anything's possible. And let's say Jen, most recently, her reply was, I'm so afraid. I'm so afraid to die. And so my question usually after that is, what is it about death that causes you to feel so afraid? And the truth is, nobody's asked them that, because everybody's skirting around. All the close loved ones and friends are a little bit sheepish after all, because it's death. And this person's dying and they don't know how to behave. So we don't know what to say or even talk about it honestly. So Jen said, yeah, I'm so afraid to die. And I said, what is it that you're so afraid of? He says, I'm afraid of everything. So I'm afraid of hell and I don't even know if I believe it. So this is the sort of things that come up. Even though she believed that we continue, all these illogical things. Well, I don't know, is that so illogical? We've been, in our culture, in Western culture anyway, we're taught in heaven and hell. You're either going up there or down there, which is a concept that I don't subscribe to, but it's in us. I mean, I grew up in the same culture, so I've had to work my way through that as well. So little by little, when we've had that conversation, then I know where they're coming from, and we can dive right in. So I say, well, look, let's have a look at it. And it's probably the first time that they've actually spoken about their fears. And something magical happens when we can talk about the thing that we're so afraid of. And we realize at the end of it all, after we've worked through all these things, hell and whatever, and I said, well, look, if such a place does exist, you are the least likely candidate to go there. I assure you that. But we get through all these things that are mostly other people's ideas, and we bring it all the way down to, it's simply this. It's the unknown. It's a step into the unknown. And I say, well, have you ever done something unknown before? Have you ever stepped into the unknown in your life before? Yeah, of course, lots of time. How did it go? Not too bad. Did quite good, actually. Well, what if we just look at it like that? And then this big fiery fear dragon just becomes a little kitten.
Yeah.
Because we've been allowed to talk about it and actually be honest to ourselves. Yeah, I'm so afraid, and have a conversation with someone who's got their arm around us, and it just dissolves. And then we can continue. I go to the hospice house. I schedule 3 times a week, but once I've made a connection like that, it could be every day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. As they're getting close to their moment, I'm probably going 2 or 3 times a day. So what happens at that end of life moment? So we've gone from this process of finding ourselves in hospice care to moving down the path a little into what we call transitioning, as you're getting close. And transitioning is you've gone from being fully cognizant, knowing everything that's going on, and still hoping that perhaps this could turn around, to transitioning where we're not so cognizant anymore. We can still communicate, but we've become so very, very weak. It's such an effort to communicate, to gather your thoughts and get them out, to speak is such an effort. And people are visiting wanting to be kind, and you feel you have to entertain, but you just don't have it anymore. One beautiful, beautiful soul who was with us for a short time described to me how just hearing someone talk was like a helicopter blaze, and he just knew exactly what she meant. If you can imagine the blaze of a helicopter kicking up all the dust. She was so weak and so vulnerable that everything felt so overwhelming. I thought that was a beautiful description. So we're transitioning, and then you go from transitioning where you're less and less communicative to perhaps in a state of sleeping most of the time. And then we slip over into this state that we call actively dying. That's a whole different phase. there we've crossed into a space that's in between this life and making our exit. And in this space is a point of no return, barring some unforeseen miracle, which has happened. Like Anita Mojani, if I'm sure you know her, she would be in what we would call actively dying.
Yeah.
There, it becomes a mystical and a magical experience. There's no telling how long we're in actively dying. It could be from the shortest I've known is 1 hour.
Oh, that is.
And the longest I've known is 10 days, where we've just gone into a state of preparation. I sort of liken it to child labor, where the mother's water's broke and there's no coming back. It's going to happen. You're not quite sure how long. It could be a few hours. And if it takes too long, well, we have ways of hurrying it along. But with actively dying, we don't. We just let it happen. But it's exactly the same thing in that there's a preparation going on. And all the obvious signs physically are taking place where oxygen is getting low, our organs are starting to shut down. But then this other mystical aspect where everything has to line up. And until that does, we're just not going to take our last breath. But there's something about our breathing pattern that's really noticeable when we're actively dying, and it gets drawn out. And it's a little bit gaspy, like, could be several seconds. 99% of the time we've got our mouth open and we're doing breathing orally. And then the spaces between that inhalation will sometimes increase. Sometimes it's been a minute or more. And then as we take our leave, there's just 2 or 3 big inhalations. And the very last thing that we do is exhale. And the next breath just doesn't come. And we've left. And it's symbolic. As we are born, the very first thing that we do is inhale. Then we're alive. As we're actively dying and we take our leave, the very last thing that we do is exhale and we leave.
Wow. It's quite beautiful, isn't it?
It really is. It's magical, mystical, and beautiful. No, I've probably been with hundreds of people in the active dying phase. Not so many have I been with taking their last breath, because we never quite know when that is, when that's going to be. Although there are signs, clear signs, and I've been with many, of course, over the years, especially being in the hospice house. It's happening frequently. Every week, people are coming and going. However, it's during that actively dying phase, if I have the opportunity to sit for a few hours and the doors close and it's just perhaps myself and the person who's leaving us, my hospice friend, and especially if it's late at night, although not necessarily, because as I say, I've just left someone who's actively dying, and there's a presence. There's what I call a passing energy, where there's the energy in the room becomes crystal clear and quite beautiful and amazing. And as the person gets closer to taking their last breath, sometimes the energy increases, almost like a light bulb, a dimmer switch being turned up even brighter. And I call that there's a passing presence. And then I know, because I've experienced this quite a few times, I know that this person's getting close. And sure enough, within the hour, they've gone on their way.
Wow, that's amazing. And it's not the first time that I've heard of this. And it may be the family members who aren't so attuned. You do this work, you're very attuned spiritually, and you're quite familiar with these things. But it may be family members who haven't had these experiences, don't realize to look out for this, that it might happen. And they talk about how suddenly they felt like the person became the entire room, that, yeah, the energy changed within the room. They said it felt amazing and it felt different. And quite often report that within a short time, the breathing stops and actually you realize that they have left, they have gone from the physical body. It's just amazing, isn't it?
It's completely amazing. It amazes me more every single time.
Really?
And I get really affected by it. I am sensitive to it. I can tell you about Kathy. She passed really unexpectedly. She'd been with us 2 or 3 weeks, unexpectedly found herself in hospice care, had all these plans for her retirement, which was just going to come in about 6 months' time. Lessons there, don't put it off. And here she was, not happy to be in hospice care, but knew it was coming. And I was visiting with her. I'd been with her just for 10 minutes or so. And this is how cognizant she was at the time. She got a plate of lunch in front of her. So this was very unexpected. But I felt something was going on. And I looked at her and I said, Kathy, are you okay? She says, no, I don't feel something's happening to me. I'm not sure what. And as she looked at me, she described that her eyes literally just rolled up into her head and she sat back in her bed and she was gone. She went straight into the actively dying mode with the breathing pattern. And so there was a lot of stuff going on in the house at the time. I just shut the door, held her hand, and joined her where she was at, which I do quite frequently. I don't always hold the hand. That's been presumptuous, but in her case, we had often done that. So I knew it was okay. Sat and held her hand, and it was such a strong vibration and energy in the room. It took me to a place, perhaps what was happening to her. I don't know. I haven't seen any visions. I haven't gone anywhere with them visually, but I've gone sensually and internally. And it was in less than an hour, she'd gone, took her last breath. And I just sat there in absolute amazement because it's kind of a suction for me in a way. It sucked me with her in a really powerful and profound way. And I just had to sit there for 20 or 25 minutes before I went out and told the managing nurse that Kathy had just passed. And then so I sat with her again for another hour or so, and we prepare, well, the nurses prepare the deceased body, and then we have a lovely rose petal ceremony where they're when the mortuary comes to pick them up, they're wheeled out, and then we sprinkle rose petals on them. I didn't wait for that in Catherine's case. I drove off to my studios where I work. I do this in my spare time. I work. And on my way home, I was so somewhere else. I was not safe to drive. I literally had to pull over and just close my eyes and just try and reel myself back in.
Really?
Which I did to some extent. My studio is not that far away, thankfully. I managed to get there, close the door, shut the blinds, and just went into a deep meditation for a couple of hours, and it was quite extraordinary. So that's the sort of presence that is often there. Now, I did just say that when we're in actively dying, there's no coming back. But I'm going to tell you an experience I had, which was very, very unusual. This was with Yvonne many years ago, and this was in the early hours of the morning. I'd been sitting with her. She was actively dying. And I get up quite early in the morning, 4:30. And this was after midnight already. I was thinking, crikey, I don't know how much longer I can stay. I wanted to stay. It was tearing me up having to leave. But so I said, I'll never get up. And I need to get up. I have things arranged that I have to do. So I just whispered to her, I said, look, Yvonne, I'm so sorry. I can't stay with you any longer, and I have to take my leave, but just trust everything's going to be okay. Just whenever you're willing, just let go. That's all there is to it. And then I sat back into the chair, and wouldn't you know it, her eyes opened. And I was almost going to be a hospice resident myself for a few moments. I tell you what, because that just doesn't happen. It's like, oh my gosh. But she looked over my left shoulder. I don't know if you can see me, and she just sort of pointed way over to the left there. And what can you see? I can't see anything. There was somebody there, and I felt a presence. And then she closed her eyes again, and that was it. Unheard of, never anything like that happened in all the years I've been doing this. But so one time, there's always one time, isn't there?
Yeah, yeah.
That's magical things like that do happen.
They do.
Yes. And I could go on all night, so you're just going to have to stop me if you have other questions. So I could share another experience where it really describes the energetic experience that we have as actively dying. This was a beautiful, fairly young Asian woman, not so long ago in the house, and she was actively dying, as I've described many times. All the signs were there, and so I was sitting with her. Strong energy in the room. So again, she is someone who had been okay, had often reached out to hold my hand, so it was okay to hold her hand. So I sat with her and held her hand. There was such a strong energy that I'm just compelled. It's like a magnet. I just have to close my eyes and join them where they're at. Usually, though, I do keep open my eyes to watch where they're at and watch what's taking place, because I'm still learning all the time. It's a little bit different for everybody, so I like to pay attention to what's going on. But in this case, I just felt like I needed to keep my eyes closed. It was such a powerful experience. And after about an hour, I felt the sensation, the energy within me increase. Like I've described earlier, it's like having a dimmer switch in a room where it gets turned up, even though my eyes were closed. That was the sensation. And so that's when I felt presence is here. So I kind of internally, I just sort of say, hello, glad you're here, and welcome. And then a short time after that, I felt this surge of energy, which just went right up my spine, tingling feeling, and then it faded. And I kept my eyes closed throughout the whole experience. I just knew she's passed. She has just left. And I still didn't open my eyes. I just wanted to experience it and just feel my way through it. And it just became more distant and distant. And I just knew that she passed. And after a few minutes, whatever, 5 or 10 minutes, I opened my eyes, and sure enough, she had gone. And one of the most remarkable things is, even when we're actively dying, we're present, we're there, and there's a presence there. When we actually pass, the most remarkable thing is we're just not there. We're not there anymore. Nobody is present. It quickly becomes an empty vehicle. And then we cool down to room temperature. We say we get cold, but it's actually not. We just come down to room temperature or to object temperature, which is somewhere in the 70s, and that feels cold to us because we're usually operating at about 98 degrees. So we drop about 25 degrees, and quite quickly we become sort of a porcelain shell. Absolutely amazing. It never fails to fascinate me.
And that's part 1 of my conversation with Paul Smith. If you want to catch the second instalment to hear even more stories, more about Paul's work, join us in the upcoming episode where we have part 2 with Paul Smith.